Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
What happens when a generation of people never grows up? It's a fantastic question. It's a question that we got from Rachel Wolf, who wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal. We ran across it a few weeks ago. We're going to discuss it here today on the Lead Every Day show. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And Mark, I can't wait to dive in. I know we're both passionate about young people, next generation leaders. This is going to be a fun conversation. This article was pretty fascinating. And I'm looking forward to your take on what happens when a whole generation never grows up. So let's dive in.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously a very provocative title, which is what great journalists do. I'm not ready to draw that conclusion. Here's the conclusion I would draw. Leaders, young people, particularly in their 30s, we're going to focus our conversation on leaders, but let's talk about the cohort that in their 20s and 30s, they are choosing to do life differently than their parents. And so I think that is indisputable at this point. They're marrying later. They're having kids later, if at all. And they're buying homes later, if at all. And of course, that has sounded alarm bells for economists because all of those things are certainly interconnected, and our economy at large depends on those behaviors, or it has historically. So whether they've not grown up or not, they are dealing with a different reality, much of it of their own creation.
Yeah, that's right. And they are sort of taking the economic side in the Rachel's article for sure. But, you know, as you think about the generation in their 20s and 30s, they are facing different challenges. And I want to acknowledge that, I mean, I don't know about you, Mark, but I remember when I was in my 20s, you know, we're trying to figure it out. And, you know how that is when you first leave home and you're on your own. But it was a different world. I mean, you and I come from the 1900s, right? I mean, it's a whole different deal now, but the technology didn't even exist that exists today. So that's a part of it. And I think there are some things that she points out in here. I want to talk about a couple things. She talked about expectations, and I think expectations are a big part of this. If you're not careful, you can grow up and think you're supposed to have a house as big as your parents, and you're supposed to have the same kind of career and the same kind of path and all that stuff. And so it's just a different world. Generations are different. I mean, there really are differences in our generation is different than the one before us. And so I think we need to acknowledge all that and see if we can't, provide some help here. Like you say, I like that.
Well, and I would, just to build on that, I think the young people we're talking about, 20s and 30s, was the thrust of this particular article and the research that was conducted. They have had a hard time, and I'm with you. I want to honor that. I want to acknowledge that. I want to have as much empathy as possible. They had to deal with a pandemic. They had to deal with inflation. I mean, student debt is probably double what it was a decade ago. So all that is real. But as she pointed out in the article, actual disposable income for that group is above where it would have been for their parents adjusted for inflation. So it's much more complex than, yes, there are some hard economic times. I think there are a lot of things going on. And again, hopefully we'll have some ideas that will help. Now, let me quickly say this for anybody that read the article. One of the quotes that captured my imagination, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, but it was something in the essence of it looks like the instructions are outdated for how to have a happy and fulfilled life, and nobody's updated the instructions. Well, again, I want to set expectations. We're not going to update the instructions for you on how to have a happy and fulfilled life. However, we do have some counsel, some advice, some things that we'd like you to consider if you're a young leader. And I guess the last thing I'd say about that is we have for years targeted our content not just for leaders at large, but leaders who believe they can make a difference in the world, leaders who've made a personal commitment to excellence, and leaders who are energized by producing tangible results. So if that's you in your 20s, 30s, 40, 50, 60s, but specifically for young leaders, we want to try to maybe give you a page of those instructions on how to be more effective in your role.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we say we want to be helpful here, and not just to the young leaders. I mean, again, a lot of people listening to this are working with young leaders. You and I work with young leaders all the time, and some of the I want to kind of double down on what you said. I'm not giving up on this generation at all. In fact, some of my best learning comes from young leaders. I mean, some of the people around us that are helping us with stuff, and some of the best leaders I know are under 40. I mean, they are some amazing, young people who are making huge impact in the world. And so I'm actually excited about this generation, but I do think there's some things we can encourage anybody who's like, they feel like they're off track or they've never gotten on track. They don't feel like they know what to do. Let's start with one of the, if anybody listened a couple of weeks ago to our list of habits, you gave a habit, I think is a good place for us to start. And that habit, Mark, was the habit to grow. Can you maybe unpack that in the context of a young leader here? I know you talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but how important that was early on in your career to have that mindset to grow. That's made a huge difference in your career. Tell a little bit of that story, if you would.
Yeah, I think for me, the best I can discern, it was the defining moment in my career. And it happened a long, long time ago. I was just a kid. I guess I was 19. I might have just turned 20. It was right there in that season. And my supervisor came to me and said he wanted to explain to me how the world worked. Well, I was shocked and amazed. I may have actually said out loud, "Do you know how the world works?" He said, "I absolutely know how the world works." And he said, "If you want more influence and you want more opportunity and you want more impact, there's only one path." And he said, "It's lifelong learning." And that was a foreign concept to me. I was an awful student, but that day I made a commitment to pursue lifelong learning because I wanted more influence, I wanted more opportunity, and I wanted more impact. And I would say to any leader, but specifically to young leaders, the earlier in your career you can make that decision, the more years of productive influence and impact that you'll have. And again, that takes many shapes and forms, and you'll need to figure out what that looks like for you. What are your learning style preferences? What are your opportunities? What are your resource constraints? I mean, there are any number of things you need to think about. But if you'll make a commitment to lifelong learning, it will change your career and I would argue your life at large.
Yeah, Mark, and I'll refer back to something that it talked about in the article. It said that one of the things that's holding this generation back is they're projecting forward. They see the world is really going to be messed up 20 years down the road. I think it was Carol Graham. They quoted her. I've got this quote here she's from the Brookings Institute. She's an economist there. She points to how climate change, political polarization, AI, they have growing resentment of corporate stuff, all this stuff. And they're just like, it ain't going to matter what I do. I would say when it comes to this idea of growing, it's easy to, one of the phrases they use in there, they just kick the can. I'll just do that later. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think there'll be some people listening who say, I'm not a learner. I'm a bad student too. You didn't let that affect you because learner really is not, that's not your core. You've made a choice for that. And I think if we're not careful, we can make a choice to just like, I'll wait till later, and later is going to come for most people. We're going to look back and go, man, I wasted a lot there. And so for the person who's listening that's really struggling to get on track, start today with this growth mindset. Talk a little bit more about that. Like, how that early start really helped you.
Well, it compounds. It's like interest on money you put in the bank, it grows. And the earlier you start, the more you're going to have at the end. And if you start learning and dedicated, focused, strategic, prioritized learning, you're just adding to your reservoir of knowledge and experience. And then over time, it could actually reflect itself in wisdom, right? So, why would you want to wait till you're 40 or 50 to start putting money in a 401k? Well, why would you want to your down the road, 30, 40, 50? Why would you want to wait till then to start learning? Your capacity to grow will determine your capacity to lead.
Yeah.
Start.
I like what your leader said. It's going to open up more opportunity for you. It's going to give you more influence. It's going to actually lead to more impact, which I think most of the people listening to this would want to have, which is really important. And so let me
share this. And I don't know that this would happen for everybody, but the fact that I committed to learning, I think it gave the organization more liberty. Not that they needed it, but I had the opportunity to cross fields and to move into new disciplines and to start things that I had no expertise. But I actually believe the fact that I had demonstrated my desire and ability to learn freed them up to give me an opportunity where they knew I'd have to learn things, but they knew I would. And so I think it expanded my career options and potential because I'd assumed the posture of a learner.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so I want to go back to your leader. You could say basically when you think about it, you learned something from this person. This I know was a mentor for you at that time. I want you to talk a little bit about the power of a mentor. I said earlier, we're learning from young people, but if I'm a young person, one of the things that has really benefited me the most throughout my life is I've always had an opportunity to learn from people who are a little bit ahead of me. Speak a little bit, Mark, to the power of a mentor for a young person. I mean, to me, that's a young, somebody's in their early 30s. I mean, I think it's invaluable to have somebody that you can lean into who's been through some of the battles before you.
Yes, I think it is one of the most powerful strategies that is accessible to every leader to have a mentor. Now, some of you are going, well, I'm not sure that's true. No, every leader can have a mentor. And I would even raise the stakes. You may want and need multiple mentors. Let me see if I can unpack that a little bit. One reason some people don't have a mentor is they're looking for a man or a woman who can help them with their fitness, their finance, their family relationships, how to read a P&L, and how to lead a team. You're probably not going to find a mentor that can do all of that. But I would suggest that you find an area or two where you want to accelerate your growth and development and find someone to help you. And that might be 2 people or 3 people that they have an area of expertise. Now, another reason a lot of folks don't have a mentor is they've set their sights too high. They're trying to figure out who's the best person in the world at branding. I want them to be my mentor, or the very best person in the world at finances. I want them to be my mentor. Well, you may not have access to those people, but you said it a moment ago, all you need is somebody who's a little further down the road than you are, who's willing to help. And the value that you can find and extract really from a mentor, it's beyond comprehension. And so I would challenge everybody listening to have one or more mentors. Just be really focused on what is it you want to learn and where do you want to accelerate your growth, and you can find somebody to help you do that.
I like the reminder that mentors come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, it's really doesn't, and even the time frame, when you think about it, a mentor doesn't have to be a mentor for life. They might be, but there's a chance that I may need somebody for a season, for 6 months. If I'm trying to do a reset, let's say with my fitness or my finances or something, I may need some coaching and coaching, I shouldn't use that word because it's a little different than a mentor. You're typically having to pay a coach. A mentor, a lot of times you may not be paying a mentor, but this is not a Supreme Court appointment. I've always said it's not a lifetime deal. It doesn't have to be.
Right.
It just needs to be the right person for the right season to help you make progress and get to where you're trying to go in your plan, is the way I would say that. And which would transition me to what I would say would be our next recommendation. It would be to make sure you have in place a simple, clear, focused, written plan. If I was saying to every young person, what's the number one thing you could do to accelerate your growth? I think a plan would be where I would start. It's, I mean, for me, and this is true for you too, Mark. I mean, every year even at our age, we're still doing a plan, an annual plan that's trying to help us go from where we are to where we want to go. And I think that's been so important for me. I have great intentions, but if I don't have it written down and I don't know exactly what I'm trying to do, or maybe I don't have it written down, I know what I'm trying to do, but I'm just not going to get there if I'm not writing it out, if I'm not mapping it out, however you want to say it. I've used the term blueprint often. We just did a little remodel project on our on one of the rooms in our home, and we had a mood board, and the whole thing was kind of laid out. This is what it's going. We're not just going to wing it and hope that it all turns out okay. And I think so many young leaders are just hoping things will get to a good place. And I mean, how many times have we said hope is not a strategy? And you've said for years you don't drift to greatness, and I don't think you drift to anywhere good. I think this having this plan is so important. We talked about focus as a habit a couple of weeks ago in that episode we did on habits to help you dominate your year. I just think this is huge, and it starts with that plan. So you want to add anything to that? I mean, to me, a good plan is I mean, to me, this is imperative if we're going to really have the kind of life that we're capable of having.
Absolutely. I want to add two things. I want to underscore what you said about simple. Now, based on your personality and temperament, I mean, I know leaders who have a 30-page annual plan. If that's you, go for it. But I think one of the keys to execution, at least for me, I don't want to project here, is the more I review my plan, the more I execute my plan. And so I have a very simple plan. And in the years when it turns into multiple pages, I create a one-page summary so that I can review it more often. So I want to underscore, don't make it any more complex than it has to be. You can look at the last week's episode where we talked about insanely simple. I think the best plans for growth are insanely simple. The last thing I would say is once you have a written plan, share it with some people who love you enough and care enough about you to ask you how it's going. That accountability will be huge.
I love the reminder on accountability. You and I have been a part of a group of guys that has actually every year we've submitted our plans to each other. We can almost call it like our council or a board that a board's probably the wrong word, but it's just a group of like-minded leaders that, there's 10 of us, 10 of us at any given time. And that accountability, knowing you're going to have to answer for your plan. Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? You don't have to have 10 people to do that. You can pick a couple of friends like you're talking about, maybe a coworker, maybe I know you talked about for years, you would submit your work plan to your boss, to your leader, and say, here's what I'm going to do to add value to the company this year. And it just builds in that accountability. I think that's so powerful, such a powerful thing. It's amazing how when we know we're going to be accountable to somebody, we're just much more likely to show up and to do it. It's like going to the gym, right? If I'm going to the gym on my own, I only have one person at that point to talk out of it. But if I'm going to the gym and I'm going to meet you and we're going to work out together, now I got to answer to you and me. And so I think there's huge upside to having accountability here with our written plans. Okay, so let's shift the focus here. What if I'm working with a young leader? What if maybe I am a young leader and this list is great, but like if I'm working with a young leader, I want to help them reach their potential. One of the things I love is investing in the next generation. It's so cool to see them make progress, and I have tremendous belief that again they're gonna go way beyond what we have in so many areas, which is cool. What would you say to that leader, man or woman, who's working with a bunch of young leaders? You got advice to them?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is just to be sure expectations are crystal clear. Like what is required? What is expected? And I actually believe that needs to be in writing. And I don't want to be legalistic, and I don't think it's a lengthy document, but as far as some key roles or some core responsibilities or some performance metrics, I hate the whole concept of a leader being surprised when they get to the end of the year to a performance review. It's like, no, let's be really, really clear. One of my friends and mentors is Ken Blanchard. Some of you know that name. His, I guess, most famous book was The 1 Minute Manager. And he said, I want to help everybody get an A. When he used to teach at Cornell, he used to be in trouble and with the faculty a lot. And it really hinged on the fact that on the first day of every class, he handed out the final exam. And the other professors went nuts. And he said, not only am I going to hand it out, he said, guess what I'm going to do for the entire semester? I'm going to teach them the answers. He said, because I want everybody to get an A. And so I think as a leader working with young leaders or working with anybody, I think that first step is often unclear or ambiguous, or there are a lot of assumptions. Let's be clear on what's expected.
Let's identify what would be an A in their role, and I think that's awesome. Okay, so I think another thing you can do if you're leading young leaders is provide them the correct amount. You'll have to. This is a little bit of a dance here, but challenge and what I'll call support. I mean, I think they go hand in hand here. Challenge is, it's so many times we're like, we want to challenge them, we want to get the most out of them, and I don't want to be the leader who extracts value from people. I want to add value. I want to help them get an A. I want to challenge them because there is more in them probably than what they think. This is not a lost generation. They may have some of that psychographic going on, and I want to remind them you can do great work here, but they're probably going to need some support. And most of you who are listening that are leading young leaders, you're in the position you're in for a reason. You do know the answers to the test, and so to be able to come alongside them and support them and make sure they have the resources they need and the encouragement they need and the accountability they need, all those kind of things are really important here. So challenge and support, you link that with what I would call coaching and feedback. I mean, there's just making sure that they know where they stand. I don't want to make assumptions here that because so many of us, we've had roles in the past where we've done things and we go home wondering, am I doing a good job? Or we think we are. And then we get to some kind of review and there's a surprise, or there really shouldn't be surprises. If we're getting this right, as let's go back to Blanchard's kind of mindset of student and teacher. That's probably not analogous here exactly, but we really want to help the student, in this case, the young leader. We want to help them get that A. And so what do we need to do to make sure that happens? And if we're thinking more about them than we are ourselves, it's amazing how much better it ends up being for us. There's going to be more loyalty, more trust, more, performance is going to go up ultimately, and that's going to help the entire enterprise, whatever we have going on. So it really is about how do we develop those people. I'll use the word you used in Uncommon Greatness. How do we engage and develop them? It is a fundamental of leadership, and I think particularly if we're an older, seasoned leader and we have an opportunity to invest in the next generation, a coaching and feedback can be invaluable.
Yeah. So I guess my last thought on that, if you're working with young leaders, you want to set clear expectations. You want to provide appropriate challenge and support. I actually still am a fan of the annual performance review, but the way I've always tried to think about it is it should be the best day of the year for that person, because you're going to affirm all those things that they were able to accomplish. And if there are remaining opportunities, you're going to talk about that, but they shouldn't be surprises because you've been coaching them along the way. But that is when you can begin making plans for the future on how to continue to address those. So you're going to affirm what's going on, and you're going to identify opportunities. Most people want to win. Most people want to be successful. I think bringing closure, I like an annual basis. It puts the bow on the previous year and sets you and the individual up for success in the upcoming year. So I like to close it out that way.
I like your challenge to make the performance review day the best day of the year. I never heard it said that way. I think that'd be fantastic. And really that comes back to how well did I lead them? I mean, ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, if you got an A, let's pretend I was not the valedictorian. In fact, I'm not sure how I graduated, but if I had been the valedictorian and if I'd gotten all A's, wouldn't I want somebody to acknowledge that? Yeah. And if you've helped somebody get A's, then that's the day you sit down and you say, congratulations, look, you did this and this and this and this and this.
Look what you've done. Look who you've become. I think that's.
And if you got a B or a B minus or a C, hey, I want to give you some thoughts on how we can improve that going forward. Well, don't you want that? Again, it ought to be a great day for people.
That's great. That's great. Okay, let's wrap it up today with a book review. And I think this book actually ties in a little bit to this conversation today. It's a book that, and this is a little bit of a shameless plug here, but I did a book back. It's been a few years now with my friend Dan Webster. We wrote a book called Finding Your Way. And I think one of the things I would say to the next generation, if they've not decided what it is they're going to do with their life, what's going to be the field they're going to enter, this book might be a really great tool, because Dan and I love the subtitle, Discovering the Truth About You. And I think if you know who you are, you've got a better chance of going into something. One of the things that talked about in the article was that all these kids are going through these graduate programs and they're just not, there's no job in the field that they've chosen. Well, so many times through the years, I've noticed people, this happened actually to my wife. She's pretty artistic. And one of the things that she wanted to do back in the day, she was thinking, I want to be a greeting card, artist for greeting cards. And there were some counselors in her life who said, there's probably Hallmark probably only has one of those. And so that's not a career. This was, this was 40 years ago. And so you're going to need something to fall back on. Why don't you become a teacher? And so, which was great. And she is a teacher and did a great job with that. But I will say this, when anybody has a birthday or, she's making something for them, she makes some of the coolest, crazy cards that anybody I've seen. It's pretty wild. But how many people are just going through the motions in their career day after day? And Dan and I noticed that with the next generation. So we wrote this book, and I'll give you a little formula here, or framework that we used. I think if you're a young leader that's listening, I'm so passionate about you being in a place where you can use your gifts, your talents, your abilities. And so let me give you 4 little things to think about that we talk about in the book. I think this will be helpful to you. The first one we said is you ought to look back. I think there's a clue about how you're wired up. Think about it, Mark. When you were a kid, if you were really organized, you're pretty much organized as an adult. Or if you were an extrovert as a 9-year-old, you're probably an extrovert as a 39-year-old. And if we look back to who we were before we were 10 years old, maybe you even have still access, if you're a young leader, to parents, teachers, coaches, whoever knew you, and you might go have a conversation like, what was I like as a kid? And begin to think through some of that, maybe make a little list. And if you can take some of that and apply it over onto your career that you're in or going into, or you want to shift into, I think that could be helpful. The second thing we said was look in. There are things in you that you're passionate about, causes, classes, things that you've taken in the past. Think about if we had a discussion here about politics, there would be people who are listening that would really lean into that. There'd be other people that go, I'm not interested in hearing anything about politics at all. If we put sports on the table, there'd be a few people that would lean into that. Other people wouldn't be interested at all. History, same thing. Business, whatever. What is it that you're interested in? What is it that we use the picture in the book? We talk about if you took a grand piano, think about this. If you took a grand piano, and a grand piano is always open on the back, and a lot of times they can open the back up. And if you yell into the back, which you wouldn't do this, but if you yell the word "hey" into the back of a grand piano, the strings that are tuned closest to the resonant frequency of your voice actually vibrate more than the other strings. It's kind of crazy how that works. That sound, how it travels. And I think in the same way, there are places and causes and people in your life that would cause you to vibrate more than, other things that they'll put you to sleep, versus something that just lights you up. And if you're thinking about it all the time, you're interested in it, look inside. And I think if you can, again, align your career, you may not be able to align all your work toward it, but if you can just get more and more, if you're a salesperson and you never get to sell anything, you're probably going to be pretty quickly, disengaged. And so this is important to, again, discover the truth about yourself. The third thing we talked about was to look up. We believe that all of us are created. We think that we have a responsibility to the planet to do good work. The thing that, as I read that article that we started with here, it just makes me sad to think so many people are just going through the motions and hopeless and despair, thinking it can't get better. I believe we all can make things better. And so looking up and believing that we have an opportunity to take things to the next level, I think that's, we have a responsibility to our Creator. Again, that's where I land on that. And then the last thing, we talked about looking out and finding your way. And as I think about making things sustainable, I think about those 35-year-old leaders. They're going to be our age someday. And how are they going to have a vibrant, life that is impactful? You started, Mark, with influence, impact, and opportunity. All those things are going to open up more so if we're in those areas that we're born to do. We're in our sweet spot. They're in our talent area. And so, I think finding your way is a great resource for anybody who's not real sure about what they ought to be doing. Maybe that's part of their struggle right now. And so if you're looking for a reset in your career, we talk about people that work with young people. If you know somebody that's really struggling with that, maybe pick up a copy. We got several business leaders we've worked with who have high school kids that work for them, and they've given them to all their graduates every year. We've had several colleges that have taken all their freshmen through around the country to help them really, before they choose a major, let's make sure that we're locked in on who we are and what we ought to be thinking about. Let's don't just do something because our parents said to, or somebody said, let's get something to fall back on. Let's make sure that we're, living the life that we're meant to live. And I think if we will, we're going to be much more, I'll use your word again, much more impact is going to happen and fulfillment. You're going to have a lot more joy if you're leaned into who you're born to be. So, Mark, I don't know if you want to comment on any of that. Any final words for the leaders out there this week?
Well, I'm optimistic about the future because I'm hanging around a lot of young leaders who are going to make a difference in the world. And I think that's my hope and prayer for anybody who feels stuck, that the world may be a mess in the future, but it'll be less of a mess if you engage. The world needs your contribution, and I hope we can help.
Yeah, that's great. If we can help, reach out to us, info@leadeveryday. And then our website, leadeveryday.com. Love to have you engage with us there. We'll have show notes here available for you with all the stuff that we've talked about, maybe even a link to the article and a place for you to be able to pick up a copy of Finding Your Way if that's something you're interested in. We will be back with you next week with a new episode. We're excited about that. I hope you'll share with your friends and family. Keep joining us here. Check out the YouTube channel if you've not done that. Love for you to subscribe so you won't miss any of our content. All right, we love you guys. Remember, the best leaders lead every day.